In 2019, around October, I'll never forget the moment that I was sitting in my van, and my children were sitting right behind me asleep, and my wife was in a bookstore. I was just listening to some music, and in front of me, there was this old Super Kmart that had been abandoned. And in that moment, my life changed. As I was looking at this Super Kmart, I felt like the voice of the Lord spoke over me and said, "Kenny, that is home church." Now, for a few minutes, I sat there and I even kind of turned around and looked behind me because I felt like I heard the audible voice of God speak to me in this moment. And I didn't really understand. And so the Lord and I had a conversation in that moment about, what do you mean? Like that building, literally, that's supposed to be home church? What, are you calling me to plant a church? And for the next few moments, while my wife was still in a bookstore and my children were asleep behind me, I had a conversation with the Lord. And in those few moments, He planted the seed of what would become home church. And part of that came to a story. One of the things that has always resonated with me is the parable of the prodigal son. And the interesting part about that story is really how it connects to my story, or how my story connects to it. You see, I understood myself as the son who ran away and sowed his wild oats and did some things that he shouldn't, and yet the father was still waiting when the son was ready to come back home. And as I did, the whole concept and the whole idea of home church started to play out. I knew that God was calling me to lead and to preach and to point people to Jesus in a way that maybe others haven't done, that was unique to our area. And so along the way, we decided that we were going to plant home church. And let me just tell you, it's been a little bit of an interesting story, a little bit of a roller coaster ride. There have been some incredible days along this journey, days that I remember seeing the first salvation, a young man named Dylan Broadwater on our very first Sunday. I also remember baptizing Dylan just a few weeks later, the first baptism at home church. When we first started, we thought we were going to be meeting in a school, and the school wouldn't allow us to meet because of COVID. And then we started to meet in homes. And then we started to meet at another church's building on Sunday afternoons, which is not really ideal. And then along the way, we thought we had an agreement to move into our local YMCA, and that fell apart, and that was devastating. But at the same time, we were able to raise $200,000 as a church to fund the next big thing for our church. We went and met at a campground for a few weeks, and then we were able to move into the school that we're currently meeting in. And since then, we've seen God do incredible things. We've been growing numerically. We've seen salvation. We've seen baptisms. We've seen life change. God has done an incredible work in the life of this church. And to go back to that moment in October of 2019, when God spoke home church over me, to see what we see today has been incredible. There have been some really high highs along the way, things that I still will treasure in my heart and that I celebrate and I praise God for. And frankly, there have been some very difficult days that I've questioned, like, man, what are we doing? Like, is this even what we're supposed to be doing? Is this what I'm supposed to be doing? Difficult days of hardship and worrying and man, just all the things that come along with planting a church. There have been days that we've celebrated new life and salvation and life-changing people. And there have been days that we've mourned and cried over the loss of loved ones and folks who have felt like they needed to leave our church. You know, there's something that I believe that we can all connect to in the story of home church. There's something that really is powerful, that if you'll see it in your own life, that you will understand that there are great days in your life and there are difficult days. And I think for me, the lesson that I'm learning so far in the journey that we've been walking on is a lesson that I think many of us need to learn in our own lives, which is simply this: it's not going to be easy, but it's always going to be worth it. You see, as you dive in with your group to dive into your story, here's what I know. There are going to be moments that you look back fondly on and you celebrate what God's done in your life. There are also probably going to be moments that bring hurt and pain, maybe even some shame that comes welling back up in you, some difficulties that you've walked through. That is our story. That's all of our stories. We all have beautiful days and we all have devastating days. But lean in. Lean into your story. Lean into what God has been doing. He is continuing to write your story. This whole series is about helping you understand that you have a story to tell. What's the lesson that you can learn from your story? Better yet, what's the lesson that others can learn from the story you've been walking through as well?